I recently completed an online course about nervous system regulation based on polyvagal theory, and I resonated with this work because it promised to help me address being anxious or shut down and making bad choices, and it has helped me. So I now have a practice with which to support the part of me that perceives danger when in reality I'm safe. And from this place, I'm little by little making better decisions when facing stress, which is very good for me and my family. Joining me today for this conversation is Kate Lynch. When I learned that Kate has been using polyvagal theory specifically to support parents and families, I wanted to dig into this topic with her for my own benefit and all of you listening as well. Kate is a trauma-informed mindfulness coach who's been raising an amazing neurodivergent kid for 13 years. Kate, thank you for being here. I'm grateful to be speaking with you.
Hi, Matt.
Hello. So let me intro and then I'll set the stage. So this is based on a little bit of what you had sent me before, Kate. As you had said, we face a lot of uncertainty today. And the question a lot of parents are asking is, how can I help my kid feel safe when I feel unsafe myself? Which really landed with me. My understanding is through your coaching, parents are realizing the importance of nervous system in supporting themselves and their kids to feel less stress and more confidence. And in a sense, mindfully engaging with polyvagal theory is one way to be a more resilient human being in the face of uncertainty, which is a great skill to have in today's world. So let's start, Kate, with a little bit about what a family might be experiencing before they start using a tool like a polyvagal theory and nervous system regulation. Maybe we can start with anything you recall from before you and your family were using this kind of regulation.
Yeah, I was in a great deal of distress when my son was younger. He had a lot of both behavioral or developmental issues, delays, and I was confused. I really didn't know what was going on. And that is very stressful as a parent to be so confused, to not understand and not have what our experience was as a family match up to the books I was reading or to my friends' experiences with their kids and their families. So it was super stressful. And I was pretty hyper focused on getting him to be different. And I really had completely dropped, even though I had been a yoga teacher for over 10 years, I had completely dropped any kind of practice of my own. And I was really spun out.
Yeah.
And I see that in parents that I work with all the time. I mean, it's totally understandable in our culture because we believe that we are supposed to already know. And every other job has training except this
one. Yeah, if I think of in my family, it might be like a dysregulated family might look like shouting, like a lot of pointed accusations, in the heat of a moment, a lot of heat, or a response to a disagreement, like a shutting down either aggressively or a withdrawal, like a person themselves shutting down and just being like, fine, but not really engaging. And I know we'll get into the nuance of these things, but anything else you would say to paint a picture for what a family might look like when there is so much dysregulation?
Well, in those times for us, there was also beautiful moments of regulation. There were these times when we would all just lie there and stare at the fans spinning together and, kind of meet him in his sensory interests. So I remember, moments of swinging together and cuddling together as really beautiful memories. So there's also that, even when we're not aware of our regulation state, we can have these moments of connection and repair and build something for sure.
Yeah, right.
It's just that it's not all that. And that's kind of the advertisement for parenting.
Right.
It's going to be all, joy and
Right. Yeah. And hopefully it's not all that kind of the hell picture that could be painted as
right.
well.
And then we come to it with our own um, experiences from our childhood. And so many parents I talk to are like, I didn't know that when my kid turned 3, I would suddenly have this, visceral emotion arise that corresponds with like something that happened to me when I was 3 or when I was 8 or 12, whatever.
Yeah. Can you give an example of that, like a kind of thing that might happen to a child at 3 or 8 that could be triggered when a parent has a child at that age?
Yeah, well, somebody wrote about something recently, so it's like this is already out in the public domain, but someone remembering that they suddenly realizing that they had braces that went on when they were 8, and their whole lives they had disrupted sleep, and it was traced back to that time, but it was traced back to like their parents' relationship ending and all this other stuff, and really it was something to do with their bite and their ability to breathe through their nose properly that affected their sleep. But they never, so that's not exactly the same thing because it was about them. And I don't think it was about their kid. When their kid turned 8, but maybe it was for some reason that I'm sure I could think of a better example. There's one that I just don't want to be. I don't mind talking about my own stuff, but I don't want to be too triggering for parents. So there's something that I remembered when my son turned 11 or 12 that I hadn't thought of in a long time. That was a time of like extreme unsafety for me that I was able to get myself out of, but I never told anyone about it, and it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about it.
Yeah. I can give an example from my life. And it's not a strong trigger, but a subtle one, which is like if my son says something about how a boy at school is hitting him, and he's like 4 years old, it will trigger the part of me that once felt bullied, whether at that age or any time around that age. And then I will get protective and have to be careful to make sure I assess the reality of the situation instead of jumping to any conclusions. But it certainly came from that part of me that once experienced something like a bullying from someone else.
Right, absolutely.
What about, if we jump to what's possible when you do the kind of work around polyvagal theory and nervous system regulation, what are some of the newer experience that can come from that work?
Well, for me, it's noticing what's about my triggers and what's true in the moment. And then also like, is this an emergency in this moment, or is this an opportunity for me to look more deeply at my own stuff and grow?
Yeah, just being able to pause and have that awareness and self-reflection in the moment is huge.
Yeah, and so many of the things in parenting that we see as emergencies in the moment, if we do step back, even if something feels really urgent, like my kid is throwing something or hitting me, or that beat that we take can often be worth it. Like as long as they're not running into the street. They're running into the street, or they're like gonna clobber another kid with a hammer or something. Yeah, of course, you've got to react immediately.
Yeah.
But so often there's that little space we can take between the kind of action or the what's it called?
You were going to say stimulus or?
Stimulus. Yeah,
Yeah.
stimulus. Between the stimulus and the response.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a practice for sure that I know that I'm engaged in and will be for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and I found it much, much easier before I was a parent.
Yeah.
Something about parenting just finds all the buttons and yeah.
Right. Um, when you discovered polyvagal theory, what do you feel felt distinct about it and important about it for you?
Well, I've always been interested in nervous system and anatomy in general, but specifically nervous system and how it aligns like with yogic physiology, which is more about energetics and chakras and things like that. And it's the energetics of our bodies are very interesting to me. And when I started learning about my son's neurodivergence, then that was like a whole other layer. And then somehow I don't remember exactly when, but I started reading about Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory and just went down this huge rabbit hole for, that has not stopped for like years and years now.
Yeah.
And it's, since I first learned about it, there have been some authors who have brought together parenting and polyvagal theory, like Mona Delahooke, her book, Brain Body Parenting.
Oh, nice.
And trying to think who else I read. Sorry.
No, it'll come later.
But even before her book came out, I was like, this is incredible. And I started working with it in my own practice. Like, how can I work with these states? And when I first learned about the polyvagal theory, there was a lot of more prescriptive, like how to get your kid to do this or that. And maybe that's when I first learned about it. It was in like the more behaviorist channels. When you have an autistic kid, a lot of times there's a lot of behavioral training that happens. And they're like, oh, there's the red zone, the blue zone, the green zone. And these are zones of regulation that we want to get the kid back to the green zone. This is where the kid should be. And that is often used as like a behaviorist model as a way to manipulate or coerce the kid to be in the state that we want them to be, because it's more convenient for us, and it is better for learning for sure. But if there's a reason to be sad, then that's the reason, right? There's a reason to be sad. That's why they're in that shutdown state or that collapsed state. If there's a reason that things feel unsafe, then they should be in that fight or flight state, because that is the most appropriate to them in that moment.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can change the environment. And then I started teaching it in my yoga classes, and a lot of my parent students were having amazing results there as well. So now, I bring it into coaching, and it can help the whole family.
Yeah. I'm feeling like, Kate, maybe you can give a brief definition of how would you describe polyvagal to someone, on the street, so to speak, before we go deeper?
Great question. So the vagus nerve is in our brain stem, and it just kind of has the root there, but my understanding is the vagus nerve was not because it has anything to do with Las Vegas, but because it is a vagrant nerve, like it expands out and goes all around in lots of different directions. So it has all these branches that come up into our face and head, down into our organs and gut. So it's related to the kind of facial muscles that we use when we're connecting, and that is the ventral vagal zone. So when we feel safe to connect with others, when we feel relational, that is stimulated, and there's a kind of back and forth response with the vagus nerve, like, oh, I can see your face, you look calm and content. That's giving me information for my vagus nerve. Now my face is going to possibly mirror yours. So that's in the ventral vagal or safe and social state. So then when we go out of that and we feel unsafe, it's actually a different system that takes over, and that's the sympathetic state of the nervous system. So that's along the whole central channel. That's where the sympathetic nervous system is mostly housed. that gives us lots of energy to either run away if we feel unsafe or to stay and fight.
Mm.
Then when those things don't work, if we're unsafe and those things don't work, then it moves to the dorsal vagal. So from ventral down to dorsal, which means lower, and into our gut. And we're my understanding is when we feel like we can't run away and we can't fight, we're not going to be able to overcome the aggressor. We go into this more shutdown state to preserve life. And that might feel like we're numbing out. That might feel like we can't even really feel where our body is. Or sometimes it feels like sadness or just exhaustion. But that is more to do with the branches of the vagus nerve that comes down into our guts.
Mm.
Does that make sense? And I know
Yeah.
you've done some training, so you should fill in the gaps.
Sure. I mean, what I can say is I learned that it's common that we have a default defensive state, or a default state will go into more familiarly. So like for me, especially when I was younger, my default was to go into that dorsal withdrawn, shut down state. And I'm sure I learned that at some point that was safer than any kind of fight or raising my energy. So it tended that followed me through into my even young adulthood, that my defensive strategy was like withdraw and get quiet or walk away. It was barely a flee. Yeah, so there's that. And then otherwise it does map with terms probably people have heard, like the fight flight is very often associated with sympathetic, and then the freeze or what else? Is there another word you know that's associated with dorsal?
I used collapse.
Collapse, yeah.
Say shut down.
Yeah.
And then there are also those mixed states, which makes it a little more complicated. But I was reading about fawn this morning.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, fawn. So this is that's a good high level view of what polyvagal theory is, and I guess I would add, it's that system that is looking out to protect us based on millions, if not more, of pieces of data, and often misinterprets safety in the current reality based on old information that hasn't been fully processed or challenged from within us. So I remember maybe a dog bit me when I was 3, and now when I go near dogs, I tighten up and I have one of those reactions, but I haven't found a way to process that old memory in my system and show myself little by little that it's actually safe for the most part to be around certain dogs and just not shut down necessarily, to be more in the current reality instead of that old memory.
Exactly. And when we're talking about polyvagal theory, sometimes we're talking about just like general nervous system regulation, but we're often talking about trauma, and everyone has some sort of trauma. So that's a trauma.
Yeah.
And the dog biting you doesn't stay on that timeline of when you were 3, because that's one of the traits of trauma, is that it is not sticking on the timeline. It doesn't stay where it's told. It kind of follows us throughout until we do bring it to the surface, resolve it. And even then it might still be with us.
Yeah.
Part of it. It's like we evolved. I mean, mammals have this same polyvagal system that we do because we evolved to stay safe. So we needed these structures, and those who didn't have these structures probably got eaten by the lions or bears or whatever, So having these practical defenses is valuable and good. And that's why I don't like it when they say, oh, well, the green zone, we want to get back to the safe and social state all the time. Like, no, there are times when I'm going to need a couple days, somebody I love died or whatever. Like, I'm going to need some time curled in a little ball, and it's appropriate. I don't have to immediately get myself back together and get back to work.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, because I think in our culture, that's the default is to have that should feeling, like, why am I unable to do this thing that would, allow me to say I've been productive today, or whatever it is that goes along with a very competitive, driven culture like ours, to always be able and doing. Even speaking to the way our culture might influence us to feel like it's not okay to be out of the green zone. And then
Yeah.
the extra energy that gives us against ourselves when we're in these other states, and even permission to be dysregulated and let that be a natural course on the way back to another more safe space.
Right. And I do find in myself and with my clients that giving ourselves permission and not being in a shame spiral about it is
Mhm.
the best and possibly only way to start to move out of it.
Yeah.
So if I'm just totally burnt out because of whatever season of life, I have a lot of students say to me, "Oh, well, but when should I make myself start to do more movement?"
Mm.
And honestly, it's like sometimes instead of like overriding your nervous system, it might be you literally like you're moving like one finger and then the next finger and then the next finger.
Yeah.
And that's your practice. It's just like something so subtle. Wiggle your toes,
Mm.
yawn, kind of go into the quiet, slow, slothful state
Mm.
and really relish it and be nourished by it rather
Mm.
than kind of wanting to try and claw yourself away from it.
Yeah. That I don't know why the link is there for me, but it sort of reminds me of when a person has a fear, let's say a fear of snakes, and that danger in going to that extreme point of like, oh, just jump into a snake pit, you'll figure it out, and then you'll be fine. Versus like, oh, let's look at a picture of a snake. Okay,
Right.
that's like a one step up the ladder of
Yeah.
familiarity and comfort. Now, okay, let's look at a snake behind glass from 10 feet away.
And my son used to draw pictures of things. He actually sometimes makes movies of scary things now, but he used
Mm.
to draw pictures of things he was scared of, which I think is
Yeah.
very empowering.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's
Like as
bringing
a
a
way.
creative process to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of this, like how to honor where we are with a, like even that sloth energy, if that's where we are, how to honor that, which is so, again, counter to our culture.
Yeah. But also then what if we have a kid who's like stuck in a fight state? That's not
Hmm.
fun. You know?
Yeah.
So figuring out things that help them to have that same level of whether it's mobilization, like a lot of times movement, dance
Mm.
parties, going for a run, karate class, kicking something other than a person,
Hmm.
punching something other than a person,
Yeah.
um, and having agency over their lives can be super helpful. Like
Yeah.
a lot of times that fight state is triggered by not feeling like there's a choice, right?
Mm.
This is scary not having a choice.
Yeah. I like where you just started going with the opportunities to give our kids a space where that energy is appropriate and they can play
Yeah.
with it. Like you said, karate class, kicking something that's not a person.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the, maybe they would be called strategies to support a child to move energy appropriately from different states.
Well, what's interesting is when you say support a child, this is often where parents want to go. So I gave some examples for kids, right?
Yeah.
Go running with your kid or go, play tag or something if they're in the flight state. There are things we can do. We used to chase each other and wrestle around the apartment. He's a little big for that now. But
Hmm.
if you can do that and get into play, it's really helpful. But
Yeah.
what's even more helpful than strategies for the kids is helping parents get regulated, helping
Yeah.
parents be aware of their state, their nervous system state, and
Hmm.
have neuroception, have that awareness of where we are,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
you're using polyvagal theory or not, checking in with your own state before
Hmm.
trying to engage.
Yeah. Can you say a little more about why that's so important?
Well, the very first way we learn regulation is through co-regulation. And I love this analogy of the second chicken. Have you heard this?
No.
Okay.
I'm excited now.
It's so I think it's from a book called The Opposite of Worry. I'll have to look it up.
Okay.
But if you imagine a chicken, surrounded by other chickens, just pecking away at the dirt, being a chicken, and then it hears a loud noise and it looks up and looks around and it sees the next chicken over just pecking away and totally fine. So it's like, okay, cool, and goes back to pecking. But if it sees that other chicken, the next one to it, the most, proximity, the one they're in a relationship with, if it sees that chicken starting to run in circles, guess what it's going to do? It's going to start running around in circles, panicking, because it sees the other chicken doing that. Yeah. So we are the other chicken to our kids, whether we like it or not. They are co-regulating with us, and they are looking, because they're too young when they're little to have a regulated nervous system all on their own. That's not how we evolved as mammals. We evolved with a need to co-regulate, and that is how we get our needs met, because we are not self-sufficient in any way when we're first born, or even those first couple of years of life as humans. So we are looking for someone to co-regulate with, and that gets to be the primary caregiver most of the time.
Yeah. So then, well, what could we explore here, Kate, about, let's say the parent taking on more of that ownership of regulation? Where could you go to give us a sense of what a parent could play with to be that more regulated self before engaging?
Well, I gave a couple of examples for the dorsal ventral state, like the shutdown state, like wiggling your toes or letting yourself take a nap. Yawning is another fantastic one, because our nervous systems yawn. We yawn when we are safe. So it's kind of a body up or bottom up approach to telling our brains that we're safe. So even if you try it right now, if you want, try it with me, yawn.
Yeah, when you said the word, the suggestion was already planted.
What's that?
Once you said the word yawn, the suggestion was already planted, and I could feel the desire.
Isn't it? Triggers a yawn response. So, and you might notice before and after, like, did that help me or not? That's why we have so many different strategies, because we've got to find one that really is home for us, that feels like home for us, and is going to be connected to whatever you said your deepest groove is. The shutdown groove. I would say my deepest groove is probably the fight groove, the fight and flight, but specifically fight was my strategy growing up to keep myself safe. So things I've found to be helpful are mobilization, like even walking in place or shaking, like try shaking your hands. Just shake your hands like you're trying to flick rings off your fingers. And things like that, just
so this is honoring the energy that's already there in a sympathetic state.
Exactly. Honoring the sympathetic energy, that state of being a little shaky and a little jumpy and a little activated. And sometimes by going there and meeting it, or like for the fight response, I might do like a roar, like a lion. Or did you see Ted Lasso? Did you ever watch Ted Lasso?
No.
Oh my God. So there's a character in it named Rebecca, and she's like this big, powerful, rich CEO lady, but if she's going into a meeting with like more powerful, richer white men, then she does this thing beforehand where she makes herself really big and makes claws and then roars. And I'm going to do it. You don't have to do it with me if you don't want to, but makes herself really big and scary a couple of times before walking into that place where she might feel a little threatened.
So if someone, it does. So let me clarify, I think a little. So if I'm a person who has a natural sympathetic response in a state where I feel unsafe, like walking into a room of people where I have to show myself and present myself, then I need to honor that energy even right as it's appearing, which could be before I even walk into the situation. And so this is that character's version of like, okay, honor it before, so I don't
Yeah, she
kind of
makes herself
let it
really
out.
big and powerful, and
Yeah,
kind of pulls up that energy, which
yeah,
is there, right?
yeah,
It's there within us, but to like bring it up and make it almost like turning something around.
yeah. And it reminds me of, you had mentioned play
Yeah.
as a state. Maybe it almost sounds like if I'm doing that beforehand, I'm almost engaging in a bit of a play with myself. Is that accurate, or what else would you say about that? The play state.
Yeah, play is awesome. It's so cool. It's like a great way, as long as we are, again, like aware of our own state, because play can start to get competitive, right? So
Mm-hmm.
play is a mixed state between safe and social and the fight state. So there's, especially if there's a little competition, you might
Mm-hmm.
notice, I notice with my son all the time, if we're playing a game, we have to ride that line, because if he starts to win too much, then he gets really like,
Mm-hmm.
the alpha. And if he starts to lose too much, then he just, wants to shut down, or like gets mad, or, somebody's cheating or whatever. So there's
Mm-hmm.
this play is such a wonderful state to experiment with that. What happens when we move between states and we're not always in that safe and social, happy-go-lucky all the time, because it's
Yeah.
going to happen in life.
Yep. Nice.
But the specific play that I found to be really helpful with my son was roughhousing, running, chasing each other around the house, and not
Mm-hmm.
hurting each other, of course. Like we always had like the safe word or whatever, but
Yeah.
getting physical.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. That's worked for me as well with my kids.
Yeah.
Um, so the other piece here was, I don't want to lose this thread. Maybe we'll just carry it throughout, which is that the parent wants to be aware of their own experience first, just
Yeah.
at least aware, even if they can't do anything right away. But am I going into this conversation in a sympathetic state where I can naturally feel I just want to fight? Then I have a choice to make. Am I going to do something to help honor that energy instead of going into aggression towards another person, or not? So I have to make that choice. And then if I do choose, how can I honor that energy in some physical way?
And
And
even
yep.
before that, is this appropriate? Does this match the context? That's the
Yeah.
main thing, is like, maybe I need this flight energy to run out into the middle of traffic to pick up my kid and get them back to safety.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a really good reason that I need this energy right now.
Yeah.
Maybe there's someone threatening my way of life and
Mm-hmm.
I need to go and protest, whatever.
Right.
Like there are a lot of ways that it's appropriate to be in
Yeah.
different states. That's why I don't like demonizing any of the states.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I would give myself as an example. Like I've gotten heated inappropriately when it's like time to go to bed, and it hasn't been happening at the timing that I want. So that's a good example, maybe, of like it's not actually an emergency, so all that extra energy doesn't match the situation.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been there.
Yeah.
I think that's really so universal, is
Yeah.
we're done at the end of the day and our kids are seeking connection and they like just want that connection so bad.
Hmm.
And going to sleep feels like disconnecting for
Yeah.
them. For us, we know I'm right here,
Yeah.
I'm right in the other room. But for them, as soon as they close their eyes, you're gone. So especially when
Yeah.
they're little. And then, yeah, if our plate or our bucket or whatever has been really full and we haven't had any decompression time, and then the only time we get is after they go to bed, then that's a total recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote on, when my son Ocean was younger, I learned that phrase, "It's not an emergency," with
Mm.
Dr. Laura Markham. And I wrote it on Post-its and put it on the fridge, put it on the bathroom mirror, put it
Mm.
all over the house. And
Mhm.
so he comes home from school and he asked me like, "What is up with this?" So then I was able to tell him like,
Mm.
"You can help me remember when, I'm acting like something's an emergency and it's not. You can actually say it to me. So he did a couple of times. He'd be like, Mom, it's not an emergency.
Yeah. Oh,
We
wow.
were able to laugh about it.
I like that. That's giving kind of the appropriate voice to our kids to help us manage a situation instead of us always feeling like we have to be the ones in control.
Yeah, it does take humility.
Right. Yeah.
That's really important to me, is like having a respectful relationship with him where I acknowledge my challenges, where I'm not always going to be this super self-regulated, like meditation queen. Sometimes things are going to trigger me and upset me, and sometimes things he does are going to piss me off.
Yeah. Right.
And sometimes when he doesn't go to bed, it really pisses me off.
Yeah. What let's talk about that. There was another thread that I really appreciated, which was the how to make sure that we're not trying to get our kids into regulation because it's more convenient for us. What else is there for you? Like either, and it could be anything. I'm just curious to dive into that a bit.
Yeah, well, having a neurodivergent kid, having a kid with a disability, has really thrown me into this world of being very aware of disability rights and of ableism in our culture. And what was the original question? Because I could totally go off on this.
Oh, it's okay. How do we hold that as parents? The idea that we don't want to just force our kids into a regulated state because it's more convenient for us.
Right. So there's that, not wanting our kids to be dysregulated because it's inconvenient, but there's also the shame aspect that can sometimes come up. If we were shamed as kids for being inconvenient, which often that's all it is. It's not like we were really bad or anything, but we were just being inconvenient or noisy or something. If we were shamed for that, then it's very hard, I think, to realize like, oh, these are just kids being kids, and this is part of them being in the way that they are supposed to be. And instead trying to get them to be different from what they can do. Like developmentally, they may not be able to do it.
Yeah.
And then the other layer of having kids with differences is then we have our own lens on it, but then we also might be looking at it from an outside observer's view because of this internalized ableism that we're always carrying around. So there's also that layer of it. Like, I don't want you to be judged by the outside world, so I'm going to try and control you and protect you from that judgment by changing you, when really what we need to do is change the world.
Yeah, and our own judgment. And
our internalized judgment, and then also being there. I mean, I've just had to be an incredibly strong advocate for my kid, and when that judgment arises, be aware of it.
Yeah.
Ooh, what's that? Where's that coming from? Because that's definitely not how I really see my kid.
Yeah. Nice. I wonder if there's anything more. I know we touched on some of the different states. Was there anything else about the polyvagal theory as different states that you feel are important for parents to know about, either for themselves to understand a bit about the regulation or just to be able to acknowledge what might be going on for their kids?
Well, I can share a story that isn't really about parenting, if that's all right. And it is and it isn't, because I don't like to drive at night anymore. And there was a time several months ago when I was driving with my family. I was driving, it was dark and it was really bad weather, and I got a migraine from looking at all the oncoming traffic light, the lights of all the oncoming cars. And then also it was very, very windy where we were. So it did feel white knuckle, scary, unsafe. And I just kind of had to grit and get through it. And then we got there and we were safe and everything was fine. And I don't know if I ever really like discharged that energy properly, because the next time I had to drive at night or it got dark while I was driving unexpectedly, like I should know when it's going to get dark, but I didn't. I was alone. It was a shorter distance. I was in the suburbs. I was not on a windy country road, and the weather was fine. But it was dark, and that triggered a lot of anxiety. And I noticed like so much white knuckling, and I was like, I suddenly realized that I was back in that same state of feeling really unsafe. The level of kind of responsibility wasn't there as much because I was alone in the car. So I didn't feel like I had other people's lives in the balance. And then I noticed that I was gripping the steering wheel really tight. My jaw was really tight. My breath was very shallow. And I was getting angry at every other driver, even though they weren't really doing anything wrong. But what I noticed I was trying to do was get home as fast as possible to kind of beat this and get it over with. And that, of course, was causing an unsafe situation. So I started working on my breath and focusing on my breath. So there are times we're going to want to be able to regulate our nervous system. So I didn't want to stay in that flight state. So I started focusing on slow exhales, sounded exhales, like a sigh or blowing out. I started doing that. And I also kept telling myself, like, you're a good driver, Kate. It's okay. You're going to make it. You'll be fine. What if you slow down instead of speeding up? And these things I just had to keep reminding myself over and over, like scan my body, relax my jaw, relax my shoulders, things. So those kind of strategies can be really helpful whether we're with our kids or not, when we're in a situation where it feels unsafe, asking like, is this really unsafe? And how could I help myself?
Yeah. I appreciate that story. And I can see myself in different versions of my life. You had mentioned before we got on this call, Kate, that you might like to guide us through something.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll do that.
Yeah.
So if you imagine a time that was stressful for you and you really needed to, for whatever reason, change your state. Like, yes, I'm saying that it's okay to be in the state that's appropriate to the context, but what if you notice, like, this is the context, it completely doesn't match where I am, and I'm being triggered by something from my past, then yes, we can do top-down strategies like telling ourselves. So you might just find a comfortable seat and tell yourself something, think of something that you could tell yourself that might change your perception, even just a little bit, like, I'm a good parent, or like I told myself, I am a good driver. And then the physiological stuff of going through. And sometimes if we have a lot of tension in our bodies, we can tense and release. So you might make a prune face and bring your shoulders towards your ears, make fists, and then let that go. And you could draw your shoulders way back behind you, feel your upper back, let that go. And then breathe into your belly, filling up your belly and then your chest. Pause for a moment with a full breath in, and then let that go in a big sigh. And then you could squeeze your legs, your butt, your toes. Let that go. And you can keep doing this, like scanning from head to toe, and just notice, oh, is there a place that is experiencing or holding on to a lot of that tension? And another thing that physiologically can really help is to make a sound with our breath and let the exhale be longer than the inhale. So any kind of sound, if you want to hum or just sigh, sometimes it has to be a very, very subtle sound because we're in a place like an office where we can't go around making roaring sounds or humming sounds. But and you can experiment with different sounds, and sometimes just 30 seconds like there's this teacher I follow, Nakamna Defo, and she basically says, like, if something doesn't work in 30 seconds, get yourself a new strategy, because for us it needs to work that fast.
Yeah. Hmm. And why would you say the physiology is so important? You know, we live in a world where there's a lot of mantras and affirmations. What is it about the physiology that is supportive in this moment?
I love that you're giving me this easy and throwing me this bone. You probably know the answer to this already. But the information coming from our brain, or the brain stuff in our heads, into our nervous system and our bodies is only 20% of the information, but there's 80% that's going from our bodies to our brains.
Mm.
So that's almost one of the first things, if you read about polyvagal theory, that's one of the first things they tell you is like 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
So do something with your body and it will feed the regulation in your brain.
I get it. Yeah. Yeah, I knew a version of that. It sounds like when you get the body engaged in the regulation, then it gives the signals of regulation to the brain.
Exactly.
And you can't just use the brain to tell the body what to do.
Yeah. But there's also brain-like cells in our guts and brain-like cells in our hearts.
Oh, interesting.
And of course, our nervous system is not staying in our brain like that vagus nerve. It goes into our faces and our brains, but it also travels down into all of our inner organs and tracts. And so, yeah, it's an amazing complex system that we have. And if we think of ourselves as mammals, I think it really helps, both in parenting and in nervous system regulation.
Yeah. Yeah, there's such a, I mean, I think of like cultures where, whether it's karaoke or like things that are regularly practiced that might actually be a place where you get to move energy in such a physical way that in effect you're doing something that the body needs, and you might actually be working through some experience from earlier in the day that didn't get to move all the way out of your system. And,
So
dancing around a fire. I mean, for me, I danced all the time in college, and all those like physical movements seem to be part of a practice that's maybe harder to keep up as a parent, especially.
I highly recommend the kitchen dance parties.
Yeah.
Like, all right, we'll have dessert in a minute, but first we're going to dance to Happy or whatever it is your song is for your family, you know,
right.
the song, and be like, we're going to go crazy together.
Yeah.
My 13-year-old really won't do it anymore, but if we put on the right dubstep song, maybe, you know. We'll find our ways.
Yeah. Well, Kate, just as we wrap this, is there anything you want to leave parents listening with?
That you're not alone. That's the main thing. No matter how hard things are, there's someone else who's experienced something very, very similar, if not the exact same feeling as you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not alone. And just reach out and be vulnerable, and you'll find your people.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to do when we have community.
Yeah. And for people listening, if you want to reach out to Kate, there will be notes in the post here, and your main website, Kate, if you could just say it for people listening.
It's Healthy Happy Yoga is my main website, but on Substack, I'm Kate Lynch at Substack.
Cool. Thank you so much for this time today, Kate. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.